that awareness is rising in the UK and in the US, and well, I think the European Union perhaps has a lot further to go.
Right.
But hats off to India, because you have awoken and you have taken measures.
Hello and welcome to the Strat News Global channel. You're on our weekly program, The Gist. I'm Nitin Gokhale. And with me today is a guest from the UK, Charles Parton, former diplomat, now a member of various think tanks, including the Council on Geostrategy and RUSI, and of course someone who watches the Chinese Communist Party very closely and its politics, and the implications of the Chinese Communist Party policies on not just the UK but rest of the world. Welcome to this program.
Thank you for having me.
So, interestingly, I was reading some of your papers, and the subjects that you are currently tackling is something that I think the world is concerned about, and you must be one of the few people who's actually concentrating on this subject, and what you call the Internet of Things, but not the Internet of Things on the Internet itself, but on the cellular Internet modules, as you've called it.
Yes.
What is the real threat there?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is explain as quickly as I can what exactly a cellular Internet of Things module is, because without that, listeners may be wondering why I'm so worried by the threat of Chinese cellular modules.
Correct.
So it's a small device. It's not to be muddled up with semiconductors, but it's several centimeters squared, say, and it consists of processors. It has antennae. It has a means of connecting to the internet. You might call it an eSIM, and it's best to think of them in many ways as the gateway to systems, a gateway to whatever they're in. And they're in very many things, anything from within your house, from smart meters to security doorbells on your door, through your modern cars have them, right up to enormous production lines and logistics and temperature control systems, alarm systems, you name it. I mean, in the world in 2023, there were about just over 20 billion of these. The projection by the industry is that by 2025, there will be over 30 billion of these things. So very important, and probably the easiest way to think of it is to consider a modern car, which is a computer on wheels.
Oh, of course,
in effect, as everyone now
more and more features are coming on.
And that will have a cellular module in it, and that is the gateway for data from the car back to the manufacturer, and then when the manufacturer manipulates that data, analyzes it, send back instructions through the cellular module. And the cellular module is vital for the control of the mechanical systems, but also for the audio systems, and as modern cars have cameras, all those systems as well. So it's a very crucial piece of modern life,
right,
and will become ever more so.
Absolutely. And here the worry is that the Chinese are dominating that market. Chinese companies are dominating that market.
Correct. I mean, the Chinese, as they often do, and work out what are going to be the most important areas of technology or industry, and they are intent on getting a monopoly and driving out competition by fair means and foul, and through the normal playbook of subsidies, etc. And they are progressing on that path. They now have about 30% of the North American market, 35% of the European market, and 86% of the Indian market.
Oh,
which is
alarming.
I would say, in many ways, an alarming number. And the worry of all that is that if you let us move forward to a situation where China has obtained a monopoly of these. Now, I'm certain that won't come about, because we should be taking measures to ensure that it doesn't. But let us suppose that it does. Then, first of all, an enormous amounts of data will be able to go back to China through these through these modules. And this isn't science fiction. If you look at, for instance, a report of about a year ago, some Tesla engineers were sacked because they were laughing and listening to audio and visual material taken from private people's cars without their knowledge.
Right.
And so that's one threat. And indeed, the British government, there was a report about a year ago of the British government security services taking apart a government car. They didn't say whose car it was. It's probably not hard to guess. And because they were worried about the data emanating from that car to China through the eSIM, as they called it, but they meant the cellular module.
Sure.
So you can see that data is a big threat. That's one threat. Now the second threat is that it is possible to either degrade the performance of the system that it's in, or just stop it,
or manipulate the car. Let's say.
Well, if it's a car, you could say turn off a number of cars at strategic points in Delhi and completely
jam
the whole seats.
Yeah.
But again, this isn't science fiction. If you look at what happened in the Ukraine war, the Russians stole a lot of agricultural equipment from
being functional.
And John Deere turned it off through the cellular module. Now that was the operating, the company, but it could easily have been the manufacturer. And Chinese companies such as QUECTEL and FIBOCOM will say, oh no, we wouldn't do that. We don't do that. Well, you could. And that's a big worry. And the third worry is that if you're a government and you depend on the Chinese for supply, then you have to be very careful in what policies you adopt, because the threat would be, just as they did during COVID, not to supply various medical pieces of equipment or whatever. Well, says China to the UK, we don't like your policy on relations with India or Taiwan or whatever, and you better be careful because supply of cellular modules might dry up. Now, I don't think they would threaten that, but our politicians would know that they could.
Oh yes, they should know.
And that means that they would be much more hesitant in making policy, which otherwise might be different and more in our interest. So with those three threats hanging over us, I think it's really important that my country, your country, countries which wish to pursue their own interests and values should not allow this monopoly to happen.
So you've spent some time in India now, 2-3 days, not much, but what is your understanding? Is this threat are people aware of this threat in India? And because in the past couple of years or 3 years, let's say, India has taken steps to ban Chinese apps. It has barred Huawei, like in the other countries, from taking part in the 5G contract or 5G competition. But going forward, there has to be many more measures to be taken by India. What is your assessment about India's understanding about this threat?
Yeah, it's been very interesting, because awareness has been the main problem. I mean, when I first started talking about this in the UK and Washington and Brussels, people would say, well, what's a cellular module and why is it so? But what is very heartening is that, having arrived here at the beginning of the week, I find that talking to your governments, talking to some of your defence establishments, talking to some of your think tanks, they're fully aware of the problem of cellular modules. I mean, normally when I talk about this, if I give a talk, I say, well, hands up who knows what a cellular module is, and maybe in the room 1 or 2 hands go up. If I say hands up who's heard of QUECTEL or FIBOCOM, or, if I'm lucky if 1 hand goes up.
Right.
This is not the case here. I think you're much further up the scale of awareness, because of course you are neighbours. You've had experience perhaps that has awoken you much earlier than perhaps some of
the other countries,
other governments, including mine.
Yes.
But that awareness is rising in the UK and in the US, and well, I think the European Union perhaps has a lot further to go.
Right.
But hats off to India, because you have awoken and you have taken measures. I mean, there will be measures that by 2027 mean that these sorts of sensitive technologies, which which interfere with your security will not be allowed. That is a very sensible approach.
Right. In fact, the coalition of security technology is something that I was reading in one of your papers, and you had spoken about critical national infrastructure to be protected from here. So in that case, can the democratic countries work together? Can they evolve some SOPs? Can they evolve some policies which are common, how to tackle this threat?
Yes, I think they should. I mean, you refer to the Coalition on Secure Technology. That's a group that we set up in the UK to raise awareness and push forward the measures. So, I mean, I think there's many things that people can do. I mean, number one is increase that level of awareness. And, you know, I hope that when Indian politicians, Indian government servants, etc., speak to their opposite numbers in my country or Europe or America or Australia, whatever, they put this well on the agenda, because it's I believe, a much more serious problem, for instance, than Huawei or Hikvision, which is on the agenda of our companies. So that's one thing. And then I think countries should exchange experiences in how they're dealing with the problem, whether that's different types of legislation, where there have been successes or not. And then, again, I think we really should, we have in Europe this concept, as I'm sure you do, of de-risking or diverging or decoupling or de-something.
Yes.
Then I think that one of the aspects of that is trusted suppliers, and in that sense, I'm from the UK, you're from India, but we should trust each other because we have the same system, we have the same values. I mean, of course we're different countries and we have different interests, but largely we're on the same page. And so, your country is a big manufacturing country. I would hope that you set up an industry manufacturing these cellular modules, because I'd far rather my country bought yours than they bought Chinese.
Yes.
For the reasons that we talked about.
I'm glad you said India's awareness is higher than what you expected, but I'm sure it needs to be implemented, it needs to be executed. The policies have to be tailored to sort of preventing this threat from becoming larger than it already is. But India has already taken some steps on the Huawei part and the Hikvision, like you said, or ZTE, and has a policy for trusted telecom sources.
Yes.
So that's for the hardware, basically. And this itself also is a hardware, but on a different scale, which normally doesn't come to anybody's attention, which you are now saying that there is enough attention. So what are the steps that one can take in terms of just manufacturing, or get some technology to be inducted into various manufacturing setups in India? Because there are cars, there's, like you said, power grids, you have home appliances, you have Alexa, for instance. So where do you start, and what should India do?
First of all, it starts with awareness, and I don't just mean in government, but throughout manufacturing, because these are small components, and it's not like a Hikvision camera which you can see, or a piece of Huawei equipment that you install. This is, and it's very likely that many of the manufacturers that use these don't know that they're in their system. I mean, they will buy, if you're a car manufacturer, for instance, you will buy a control unit, and that will have, let's say, may have a QUECTEL cellular module in, but you probably don't know that. You just have subcontracted that to someone else to build, and then you, as it were, slot it in. So that's what I mean by awareness. I mean that people need to know who all the levels of their suppliers are.
Components and subcomponents also should be tracked.
Yes, and furthermore, I mean, in that sense, if government is saying to industry or whatever, I'm sorry, but you cannot install these sorts of from these sources, then I think industry will wake up fairly quickly to that and do something about it. So, for instance, in my country, we've passed a government procurement act last year, and although it's not yet in operation, there will be a unit which will which will keep a debarment list, which means that if on national security grounds we don't think you should be allowed in our supply chains, you will go on that list, which means that any company bidding for a contract, under a government contract, procurement contract, must know whether somewhere in its supply chain, right down at the bottom maybe, is a device or piece of hardware that is not allowed on that list. So the companies will, I think, very quickly have to learn that. So that's what I mean by awareness.
Yeah.
But if
legislation, maybe governments.
Well, whether that's the right. I mean, I think you already have quite a lot of legislation in India that is actually far in advance of other countries to deal with this problem. But you have 86% for China. That has to be reduced.
Sure.
Now, first of all, you can't reduce that just by saying, well, we'll take them all out. There are too many.
You need alternatives.
Yeah. And you would have to in certain, like defense, security, intelligence areas.
Critical infrastructure, national critical
But I expect, given your levels of awareness, that that's already going on.
I think it's already happening.
In India. Yeah. I'm not optimistic that that's happening back in Europe. So for us, we still have work to do. But in the initial stages, sure, I mean, India can import these things, but you will want your own industry. These are as I say, everywhere, and increasingly
not too high tech either.
And it's not that high tech. I mean, they can be if you go into edge computing, where more of the processing is done in the device. But it's not difficult. And well, it's always difficult setting up a new industry and a new supply line. But where needs must, one does. And again, I'm not an industrialist, but I would imagine that some of the foreign companies that produce these already, will already be looking to produce in India. And whether they then set up joint ventures or whatever, I'm a China think tank person. I'm not an industrialist, but you can see the general direction in which it should move.
Right. Great to know that, and I think this is an eye-opener for many of our viewers, including me, because one knew about Internet of Things, but not the cellular Internet of Things module, which you spoke about so extensively. So thanks for that education and information.
Pleasure, and thank you for inviting me on the program.
No, my pleasure, and therefore viewers, some of these guests who come to us actually give you something which you will normally not see in the the usual media, and therefore do keep watching Strat News Global. You know where to reach us. Your feedback is important, and of course keep subscribing to our YouTube channel, and our social media handles are there for you to see. Do follow us wherever you can, and of course wait for the next edition of The Gist over the weekend next week. Till then, it's goodbye.